Yes, so in the Student Wellness Resource Center, my primary role is to provide education to students on campus surrounding alcohol and other drugs, as well as bystander intervention. So any education that our students receive on campus will come from either myself or my counterpart, James. And for the Title IX office, I provide education around dating violence, domestic violence, stalking, sexual harassment, any gender-based discrimination. We want to make sure students are aware of what those Title IX issues look like, so that way if they ever encounter it or have encountered it in the past, they know that we are the resource for them on campus. So a typical day for me would be I would come into work, check some emails, just kind of get the day started. And typically I would have either classes that I'm going to go speak to or groups of students that I'm going to do presentations or trainings for. So that could be groups like first year students, athletes, Greek life, or clubs on campus. Yeah, so initially when I came to the University of Maine, that's where I did my undergraduate degree as well as my graduate degree. I came in and I wanted to do civil engineering, and I found that when I got here, it necessarily wasn't what I really wanted to do. I consider myself a people person, so I ended up switching majors. I believe it was my freshman year actually, and I ended up going with child development and family relations. Like I said, I'm a people person. I loved working with people, and then I ended up getting my master's in human development. So for me, I realized that I really wanted to have that interaction with people. Civil engineering wasn't necessarily going to give me that opportunity, so that's when I changed majors.
Awesome.
Job is being able to be out amongst the students, being able to have that conversation, affecting change in their thought process. Being that I went to the University of Maine, I know what a majority of our students are up to. So just helping them make smart decisions so that they can, one, get the best out of their college experience while not jeopardizing their academic success as well. So I really enjoy having those conversations with students and being able to help shape them into the people that they want to be. I would say a challenge of my job is um, not being able to, for right now, COVID-19, obviously last semester was remote from spring break on. So that was hard, not being able to interact with the students, just because I get my energy from people. So not being able to have that face-to-face interaction was really challenging.
All right.
Junior year, senior year, you're thinking about what path am I going to take after high school? Am I going to go to the traditional 4 year college? Am I going to go to a 2 year college, get some of those gen eds taken care of, then go to the 4 year school? Or you can go to a trade school or go into the military. Like there are so many paths for you. My advice is I would just think long and hard about where you see yourself in your life. Like what gives you joy? If you go into the career path or the major where it doesn't feel like it's necessarily work, you're going to enjoy every day that you go to work. It's not going to feel like going to work. So I would just say, really think about yourself, what you like to do, and try to figure out and mesh together what that might look like for a career. And if you get to a university and you decided you wanted to be in finance and you get here and that's not what you want to do, it's okay to change your major. People do it all the time. So don't think that you're the only person that is unsure of where they want to be.
Sure. Hi, I'm Allison Mitchell, and I have a couple different roles. So I have a private mental health practice in downtown Bangor. I'm the sole proprietor, so I get to give myself whatever title I want. I'm the I'm the owner. I could be the CEO, whatever. Um, I'm a licensed clinical social work, and I do mental health therapy with adults 18 and over. Primarily, well, most of the people in my practice are women. I see a lot of women who've had interpersonal traumas, experienced sort of some sort of relational, I should say, trauma, either currently or in their past. A lot of depression, a lot of anxiety. And as you can imagine, in our current environment, a lot more depression, a lot more anxiety because everything is virtual. And it's been a real learning experience to be able to do therapy by video. I've been pleasantly surprised. It works a lot better than I thought it would have. In addition, I also teach part-time at the University of Maine School of Social Work. I've been an adjunct instructor for 5 years, I think. A while. I've been at it for a while. I typically teach undergraduate research and social welfare policy classes, and then sometimes I also teach MSW research methods class and MSW policy classes. So that's a little bit of what I'm doing right now. In the past, I also have worked in education. I've been an educator pretty much since I graduated from college in some way. I was in the classroom, I've been in administration, I've also been an elected official on the on the school board side of things, and I've been a classroom volunteer. A lot of what I will say about my professional journey is that I made my jobs work around my ability to raise my children, because I made decisions based on my priority was when they were little, I wanted to be at home with my kids. And then as they reached school age, we actually had a big transition as a family. We moved here to Maine, and then had some more transitions as a family kind of a few years after moving here. So I actually ended up being home with my kids because that was the right thing to do for a little bit longer than I might have anticipated. So it took me a little longer to get to social work than I had initially anticipated, but that's life and that's how it goes. And the truth of it is I'm incredibly grateful to have had all of the experiences that I had before I got to social work, because I think all of that has really enhanced my ability to then bring it all together into social work. So my children were either second and fourth or third and fifth grade, I think. I think they were third and fifth grade, so 9 and 11-ish by the time I came back to get my MSW. So that gives you an idea of sort of the period that I was either part-time in the workforce or doing a lot of what I would call meaningful volunteer work that kept my brain active and kept building my resume, but was something that where I could control the timing so that it would fit with kids. And I think maybe one of the most important takeaways that I can offer is that from the perspective of, like, when I think about where I was when I was graduating from high school and thinking about college, that part of the path was, I guess, what you would call fairly traditional looking. I graduated from high school and went to a 4-year liberal arts college. I majored in political science. I focused on international relations and comparative politics, took a lot of English classes, maybe a couple of psychology classes. Social work never crossed my mind. I don't even think I really knew that it existed as a profession. I went into college thinking that I was going to go to veterinary school. And I will tell you that by probably midway through my first semester of college, which would be halfway through an entire year's worth of biology, I was already aware that I wasn't going any further in that direction. But it was a little bit painful because back in those days where I went to college, in order to get credit for Bio 101, you had to complete Bio 102 in the spring. So it was a little painful to be maybe a half to 2/3 of the way, let's say like November of my first semester of college, and already be aware that I was done taking biology and I was not going to be a veterinarian. And I had to go all the way through May so that I could get the credit. That was a bit of a slog, but good knowledge. I came in handy later when my kids got to high school and started taking upper level bio classes. So that's a little bit of what I mean, like you don't know where you're gonna go. And I certainly had no idea. I thought I had sort of this really clear idea graduating from high school. Not at all, not at all. And what ended up happening in college, I took a political science class in the spring of my freshman year just because I kind of needed to get that distribution requirement out of the way. Happened to find a professor who I really clicked with. I just loved the class. And he really pushed me to tighten up on my writing. I credit him with really getting me to be able to write well. And there was something in that combination of the professor and the class content and my recognition that here was a place that would teach me how to write the way I wanted to write. It just kind of all clicked. And then, from there, I went from there. When I graduated from college, well, when I went into college, one of the things I thought I would do would be to study abroad for a year. I ended up not doing that. And so when I graduated from college, I wanted to spend some time abroad because I hadn't done it during my undergrad experience. So my first job was actually in Japan. I spent a year in Japan teaching in a Japanese junior high school, 7th, 8th, and 9th graders, through a program called the Japan Exchange and Teaching Program, which is administered through the Japanese Ministry of Education. The program still exists, so I'll just plug, it's still out there. If this sparks an interest to people, you can look it up, it's still there. They hire native speakers of English from all around the world to come and teach in their schools. And depending on the district, it can be arranged from elementary through high school, kind of depends. But anyway, it was an amazing, amazing experience. I was in a very, very small town, very isolated. It would be a lot like being the only foreigner in Orono. I didn't have a car. It was a 30-minute bus ride to the local train line. You can't tell how tall I am when I'm sitting down, but I'm 6 feet tall. And at the time, my hair was a lot lighter. It was very blonde, and it was a town that was on the Pacific. So with all the saltwater air, my hair got very bleached white. So 6 feet tall, blue eyes, blonde hair. Nothing about this presentation looks Japanese. And it was an incredible experience for me, really eye-opening, to be able to experience what it felt like to be different and to really stand out in a crowd in a way that wasn't necessarily how I always wanted to be able to. So that was an amazing, amazing experience. While I was in Japan, I traveled throughout the country. I also had an opportunity to go to Hong Kong while it was still under British rule before it reverted back to China. So now, you know, especially during current events, what's going on now, I'm really grateful that I had opportunities to see that part of the world. Then I came back and thought, okay, now what? And I ended up taking a teaching position in Washington, D.C. So I lived in Washington, D.C. for a couple of years, and I was teaching high school through a multi-partisan educational foundation. So every week I would have students who came from 4 or 5 different states around the country, and I'd have a workshop of about 20 students. And we would use the entire city of Washington, D.C. and some of the surrounding areas as our classroom. So for example, if I wanted to teach about civil rights, we might go to the Lincoln Memorial and I would teach about civil rights there, or I might talk about the Civil War there. Back in those days, this was long before September 11th, 2001. So back in those days, we could go into the Supreme Court to observe oral arguments. We could go into the Capitol building. When I taught students about how a bill becomes a law, literally we would walk the steps from like the House of Representatives side. We'd go from their offices and their tunnels underneath, and we'd go underneath the Capitol and go into the Capitol building, and then we could walk over to the Senate side, and we could walk over to the Senate office buildings, and we could just like literally walk all the steps of how a bill would go from being an idea to becoming a law. That was a really incredible job, and really sparked my love of teaching and of being in the classroom. And it forced me to become a very creative educator because of course I didn't have any of the standard like classroom equipment, which is pro and con. I loved it, but there are times when it would be awfully nice to be able to turn to like a whiteboard or a blackboard, and you don't have that when you're out and about in the city. From there, off to the West Coast to Seattle for a few years. It was only supposed to be 2 years. I have a master's in Japan studies from the University of Washington. Clearly that draws out of my experiences in Japan. And I thought that I would probably end up teaching like in a private school or something like that. And I did the master's in Japan studies rather than doing a master's like in education because I thought it would be more broadly applicable. I thought it would only be a couple of years and then I'd be back to the East Coast. It was 10 years, a whole lifetime. In the process of when I lived in Seattle, I got married, had kids, bought a house, did the whole like growing up adult stuff happened out there. And I was working in the admission office of a private 6th through 12th grade school at that point. So at that point I was in educational administration. And then moved from Seattle here to Orono, and I've been here in Orono for 17 years, I guess. And the kids who were born in Seattle are, you know, K through 12 in the Orono school system. And when we were little, I was doing some volunteer work. And then like I said, I've gotten into social work since then. I knew out in Seattle that I wanted to go into social work. I just, at the time, it wasn't the right timing. I mean, I had infants. It wasn't the right timing. And then the move to Orono was a little bit unexpected. And again, the kids were pretty little. They were 2 and 4 when we got here. So there was some settling time. And then, like I said, there was some family transitions and things that happened. So it was a few years longer than I expected, but I knew, probably, I don't even really remember when, but certainly around the time that my oldest was born, I was aware that social work was the direction that I wanted to go. It just took a little while to get there. That's not unusual in social work at all. And I think one of the things that I love as an instructor in the classroom is that we often have classes that are fairly mixed. So we'll have sort of traditional age undergraduate students and then some non-traditional age undergrad students. And I think it really makes the classrooms very rich. So I got to think about this a little bit. After I graduated with my MSW, I spent a couple of years doing what we would call macro level social work. So more like agency, policy, advocacy, research. And I was pretty heavily focused on research and producing research that we could then use for policy advocacy. For the first couple of years, that was sort of where my focus was. I've recently finished a PhD in clinical social work. And as part of that PhD process, I worked at Acadia Hospital for a couple of years as an outpatient mental health provider. I'm now independently licensed, and that was when I started my own practice a couple years ago. And in the process, started my practice. I had finished all my doctoral coursework. I started my private practice, and I have since written and finished and defended my dissertation. So I am fully all the way done. I'm Dr. Mitchell, yay. And in 2015, I think it was the first time that the School of Social Work approached me and asked if I could teach some research methods courses. And that's how I got in the door. I happen to, like, my mind works well with research, and I happen to really enjoy it. And with adjunct teaching, with part-time teaching, you get what you're offered. And I happen to have some unique skills in research and policy that a lot of social workers don't like quite as much. I love that stuff. And so that is sort of how it came about that I've ended up doing a lot of adjunct teaching, which I really enjoy. I find that my practice experience really enriches what's in the classroom, but then also what I get in the classroom really helps me then come back to private practice and be able to kind of bring the energies together. I have a number of clients who are sort of in the 18 to 22 range. So I find it really helpful to also be in the classroom with similar age students. I think it helps with the empathy. So it's not what I would call a straight line journey. In my opinion, a career path is when you look behind you, you can begin to see the path. It's not like, I've never had the experience of being able to see in front of me very clearly, this is the path I'm going. It's more like, this is the appropriate decision for me at the moment. And then later I can look back and I can see how it all goes together. But at the time, I often feel like I'm just sort of out in the woods, trusting that it's all gonna work out. So I guess what I would say from my own experience is be open to what comes along, because you never know where it's going to take you. As a mental health therapist, both at Acadia and also in private practice, I will say what I love about the work is being able to make connections with people. I mean, really deep connections one-on-one. Mostly I do individual therapy. I have done some groups too, but it's that individual therapy. It's such an incredible privilege to be allowed into people's lives and to be given the opportunity to facilitate their growth. I love that. It's just amazing. And I mean, time and time again, just yesterday, I was texting with a really dear friend and colleague and just saying, like, what a wonderful, amazing mystery it is to be able to sit with somebody and then all of a sudden see things click because something came together yesterday with a client that we've been working for months, just feeling sort of stuck, both of us. And all of a sudden yesterday, I don't know what changed really. Well, I kind of do, but something shifted and clicked. It's like, wow, we did that. That's cool. It's not always easy work. Actually, it's probably the hardest job I've ever done is therapy. It looks easy on the outside. But I think what you have to remember is that this is the instrument of change. And so my job involves my being available, which can be really exhausting. So it's really, really important that I have some really good boundaries and also that I am really careful about the things, making sure that I do the things that sustain me, like getting regular exercise, eating reasonably well, but a good amount of ice cream is not a bad thing either. But eating relatively healthy, doing the things that help me sustain myself so that then I have myself to be able to then sit with other people. There's a fair amount of paperwork that's involved in doing social work at any level. That is not my favorite. It is what it is. We have to do it. I mean, I want to get paid, so I do the paperwork. Is it what I like doing? No, not at all. And in the agency work in particular, it was really challenging to feel as though you were constantly sort of accountable for your time because there were some productivity requirements. Like you needed to see X number of clients, billable hours. You needed to have X number of billable hours in a week. That was pretty challenging. I far prefer private practice where I have a little more control over that. So those, it's some of the realities of the landscape that we live in, the paperwork stuff. It's not fun, but you just do it. The classroom, I think much the same way. It's the connections with students just really drive me and are super fun and so engaging. I often learn as much from my students as I hope they're learning from me. And there's the energy and the excitement of taking concepts that are typically either difficult to understand or oftentimes for social workers, they don't really understand, like, why do we need to know about research, for example? So to be able to take the time and break it down and make it approachable and help people make the connections, I love that. What's difficult about teaching? The paperwork, grading. I think very few instructors and professors really actually enjoy grading. It's hard. It's really hard work to grade papers and stuff, and to feel like you're giving good feedback in a timely manner. I'm aware that that's an important responsibility, but it's hard. And there are times, I'm trying to think about how to say what I mean. There are times when it's really challenging because you can so clearly see that a student or even a whole classroom is just really struggling, but for some reason you just can't quite get that connection. And it's hard. It's really hard to see people struggle and know that you could help and know that somehow something's not clicking. So that can be a little frustrating. I think in any helping profession, there's always that danger of you want so much to help. That's why you're drawn to it. You want so much to help, but you're only half of the equation. The other half is the person or the people who may or may not feel like they need the help that you might be there to offer. And I think that's one of the challenges in helping professions in general, is recognizing that while we may have lots to give, it's a two-way street. And there has to be a willingness to receive before our help is anything other than intrusive. And that's a challenge. It's something you grow into.
Yeah, so I am a clinical psychologist working at a university counseling center in central Pennsylvania. Previously worked at the University of Maine's Counseling Center. And essentially what I do is I work with students on an individual basis to provide one-on-one mental health counseling for them. Sometimes that's every week we meet, sometimes that's every couple of weeks we meet, depending upon their availability, my availability, their need, kind of what they're working on. I also do a lot of consulting with faculty and staff about students that they are concerned about. I'll have phone calls with parents who call wanting to understand how they can best support their student. And so I'll have conversations and talk through, in the role of a parent, what does that look like? I also engage in group therapy counseling, or we have that here at our center. We also do a lot of outreach, so guest lectures in classrooms and different workshops on topics, everything from healthy relationships to how to manage your stress and anxiety so it doesn't interfere with your academics or your personal relationships. We see students for a variety of concerns ranging from homesickness and roommate conflict to more serious mental health concerns like major depression, struggling with psychosis, substance abuse. So we really see the gamut. I am a very non-traditional student. So it started off traditional in that right out of high school, I went to a four-year university. I was the first generation in my family to do that. And I went to a four-year university, and then come the second year when it came time to get the financial aid I needed to stay, unfortunately, I didn't qualify for the financial aid. My family made too much money to give me aid, but my family didn't feel like they had enough money to actually cover my education. So I ended up having to leave. I left that four-year program where I'd been studying Spanish. And ultimately, I ended up just kind of working for several years, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I moved abroad for a few years. I worked as a nanny. And when I moved back to the US, trying to think of what I want to do, started working for my family's business. And that got me a lot of practical experience and bought me some time to really assess, what do I want to do? What am I passionate about? So I decided to pursue a business degree, thinking that that was going to be kind of just a simple, straightforward, really practical degree. And I was good at it. Administratively, I had the skills, but the longer I was in that, and again, that took me a lot of time. I did a lot of community college classes first in order to be able to then transfer to a four-year degree or a four-year institution to finish my degree. Ultimately, I did get my undergraduate degree in business, but by the time I was about to graduate, I decided that I did not want to stay in business and that I wanted to change careers. I wanted something that was going to be intellectually, emotionally, personally fulfilling. So while business was something I was skilled at, it wasn't very fulfilling. So I did a lot of soul searching myself, asked friends and those who I felt knew me, knew my strengths, knew my interests. And the thing that kept coming back to me was that I really enjoyed working with people in a one-on-one setting, kind of diving deep, getting vulnerable, talking about what was going on for them, and finding ways to live a life that felt congruent and balanced. And so ultimately, I decided that I was going to go back to graduate school, which for somebody who is a first-generation college student who had no family history of getting an undergrad degree, going back to graduate school felt incredibly overwhelming. Did the best research I could, debated a master's, initially was considering a master's program. And ultimately, I was just at a point in my life where I had the time to devote to a longer degree. And if at any point I wanted to, say, teach in a higher education setting, I knew that I was going to need a doctoral degree. And so I decided to not pursue a master's degree and just jumped right in to a doctoral degree program in clinical psychology. And so I moved from Los Angeles, where I had been born and raised, moved to Chicago for my doctoral degree, and then up to Maine, where I worked for 4 years. And ultimately, it was not at all a linear path, but I think that there's just something really valuable about allowing yourself to say, hey, I don't know if this is the right thing for me. Okay, I see that there's value in a degree. I'll get something, but I'm not going to be locked down or feel that I'm stuck in that profession for the rest of my life. I was in my early 30s when I chose to pivot and change careers. So I think that that's something really important to consider for anybody looking into college and careers long term, is to never feel like you're stuck with one thing or another. So while I'm now working full time as a licensed clinical psychologist, I would not have predicted that I was going to be doing that when I was 19. I'd say that the best thing about my job is also one of the most challenging things. And it's just two sides of the same coin. I absolutely feel honored and privileged to be able to sit with students in a one-on-one capacity, for them to share their vulnerabilities, their struggles, their hurts, and to help them find a way through that, to be able to live a life that is meaningful to them, that is filled with the things that bring them joy and contentment. That also honors the pain and the struggles and the traumas that they might have experienced. And so one of the most challenging things is actually sitting and bearing witness to what folks are going through. And I think especially when I think about all that's going on in our world right now, with health concerns, with the pandemic, with racial injustice and systemic oppression, it's incredibly humbling to be able to walk alongside students who are wrestling with that at this really kind of dynamic age, developmental time in their life, where they're figuring out who they are and how they want to live their lives, not just who they've always maybe been told or encouraged to be by families or well-meaning mentors. And so that's one of the most exciting things, one of the best things. But it's also challenging because they're bumping up against factors sometimes that are outside of their control. So a student who is incredibly motivated, very self-aware, wants to break free of some generational trauma, but then they're bumping up against some systems that make it incredibly difficult to let go of those things, whether those be financial systems or just other social economic systems. And so that can be really challenging to sit with, and it pushes me to really have to wrestle with, what's my role in this? How can I advocate for them? What am I doing in my own life that's congruent with who I am professionally? And so it's just this integration of the personal and professional that I'm always having to kind of think about, and make sure that I'm living a life that's as authentic and honest with myself as I encourage my clients to be.